I think this conversation we're going to have, I'm imagining it's going to be something like a field guide to what technology is doing to the human mind. I think we'll talk about how we can decide to move intentionally in that space of possibilities in a way that's healthier for all of us. And this is obviously something you're focused on. But to bring everyone up to speed, because even I was not up to speed until just a few days ago, what is your background? And I've heard you've had some very interesting job titles at Google, perhaps among other places. One was the resident product philosopher and design ethicist at Google. So how did Tristan Harris get to be Tristan Harris, and what are you doing now?
Well, first, thanks for having me, really. It's an honor to be here. I'm a big fan of this podcast. Yeah, my role at Google, that was an interesting name. So design ethicist and product philosopher, I was really interested in essentially when a small number of people in the tech industry, influence how 1 billion people think every day without even knowing it. If you think about your role as a designer, how do you ethically steer 1 billion people's thoughts, framings, cognitive frames, behavioral choices, basically the schedule of people's lives? And so much of what happens on a screen, even though people feel as if they're making their own choices, will be determined by the design choices of the people at Apple and Google and Facebook. So we'll talk, I'm sure, a lot more about that. I guess prior to that, when I was a kid, I was a magician very early. And so I was really interested in the limits of people's minds that they themselves don't see, because that's what magic is all about. That there really is a kind of band of attention or short-term memory or ways that people make meaning or causality that you can exploit as a magician. And that had me fascinated as a kid, and I did a few little magic shows. And then flash forward, when I was at Stanford, I did computer science, but I also studied as part of a lab called the Persuasive Technology Lab with BJ Fogg, which basically taught engineering students how this kind of library of persuasive techniques and habit formation techniques in order to build more engaging products. Basically different ways of taking advantage of people's cognitive biases so that people fill out email forms, so that people come back to the product, so that people register a form, so that they fill out their LinkedIn profile, so that they tag each other in photos. And I became aware when I was at Stanford doing all this, that there was no conversation about the ethics of persuasion.
Right.
And just to ground how impactful that cohort was, in my year in that class in the Persuasive Technology Lab, my project partners in that class and very close friends of mine were the founders of Instagram. And many other alumni of that year in 2006 actually went on to join the executive ranks at many companies we know, LinkedIn and Facebook, when they were just getting started. And again, never before in history have such a small number of people with this tool set influenced how people think every day by explicitly using these persuasive techniques. And so at Google, I just got very interested in how we do that.
Yeah, and so you were studying computer science at Stanford?
Originally computer science, but I dabbled a ton in linguistics and actually symbolic systems.
Yeah.
Because you were at Stanford eventually.
Yeah. That was a great major at Stanford. I was in the philosophy department. There was overlap between philosophy and computer science for symbolic systems. I think Reid Hoffman was one of the first symbolic systems majors at Stanford.
Yeah.
So persuasion, the connection to magic is interesting. There's an inordinate number of magicians and fans of magic in the skeptical community as well, perhaps somewhat due to the influence of James Randi. But I mean, magic is really the ultimate act of persuasion. You're persuading people of the impossible. So you see a significant overlap between the kinds of hacks of people's attention that magicians rely on and our new persuasive technology?
Yeah, I think if you just abstract away what persuasion is, it's the ability to do things to people's minds that they themselves won't even see how that process took place. And I think that parallels your work in a big way, in that beliefs do things. To have a belief shapes the subsequent experience of what you have. I mean, in fact, in magic, there's like principles where you kind of want to start bending reality and creating these aha moments so that you can do a little hypnosis trick later, for example, that people be more likely to believe, having gone through a few things that have kind of bent their reality into being more superstitious or more open. And there's just so many ways of doing this that most people don't really recognize. I wrote an article called How Technology Hijacks Your Mind that ended up going viral to about 1 million people, and it goes through a bunch of these different techniques. But yeah. That's not something people mostly think about.
You also said in the setup for this interview that you have an interest in cults.
Yeah.
What's that about, and to what degree have you looked at cults?
Well, I find cults fascinating because they're kind of like vertically integrated, persuasive environments. Instead of just persuading someone's behavior or being the design of a supermarket or the design of a technology product, you are designing the social relationships, the power dynamic between a person standing in front of an audience. You can control many more of the variables. And so I've done a little bit of sort of undercover investigation of some of these things.
You mean actually joining a cult, or
No, not joining, but
showing up physically and
many showing up physically. Many of these things are none of these cults ever would call themselves cults. I mean, many of them are simply workshops, sort of new agey style workshops. But you start seeing these parallels in the dynamics.
Do you want to name any names? Do I know these groups?
I might prefer not to at the moment. We'll see if we get there.
Okay. You have a former girlfriend who's still in one? Or?
No. But I did actually, one of the interesting things is the way that people that I met in those cults who eventually left and later talked about their experience and the confusion that you face. And I know this is an interest you've had. The confusion that you face when you've gotten many benefits from a cult.
Right.
You've actually deprogrammed, let's say, early childhood traumas or identities that you didn't know you were holding, or different ways of seeing reality that they helped you, get away from. And you get these incredible benefits and you feel more free, but then you also realize that was all part of this larger persuasive game to get you to spend a lot of money on classes or courses or these kinds of things.
Right.
And so what the confusion that I think people experience in knowing that they got all these benefits, but then also felt manipulated, and they don't know in the sort of mind's natural black and white thinking how to reconcile those two facts. I actually think there's something parallel there with technology because, for example, in my previous work on this, a lot of people expect you, if you're criticizing how technology is designed, if you might say something like, oh, you're saying Facebook's bad, but look, I get all these benefits from Facebook. Look at all these great things it does for me. And it's because people's minds can't hold on to both the truth that we do derive lots of value from Facebook, and there's many manipulative design techniques in across all these products that are not really on your team to help you live your life.
Right.
And that distinction is very interesting when you start getting into what ethical persuasion is.
Yeah, it is a bit of a paradox because you can get tremendous benefit from things that are either not well-intentioned or just objectively bad for you, or not optimal. Maybe, the ultimate case is you hear from all of these people who, survived cancer, and cancer was the most important thing that ever happened to them.
Right.
So a train wreck can be good for you on some level because your response to it can be good for you.
Right.
You can become stronger in all kinds of ways, even by being mistreated by people. And so, but it seems to me that you can always argue that there's probably a better way to get those gains.
Well, and this is, frankly, with your work on the moral landscape, when you're thinking about, if you're a designer at Facebook or at Google, because of how frequently people turn to their phone, you're essentially scheduling these little blocks of people's time. If you put, if I immediately notify you for every Snapchat message, which Snapchat is one of the most abusive, more manipulative of the technology products, when you see a message from a friend in that moment urgently, that will cause a lot of people to go swipe over and not just see that message, but then get sucked into all the other stuff that they've been sort of hiding for you, right? And that's all very deliberate. And so if you think of it as, let's say you're a designer at Google and you want to be ethical, and you're steering people towards these different timelines. You're steering people towards schedule A, in which these events will happen, or schedule B, in which these other events will happen. Back to your point, should I schedule something that you might find really challenging or difficult, but that later you'll feel is incredibly valuable? Do I take into account the peak end effect, where people will have a peak of an experience and an end? Do I take a lot of their time or a little bit of their time? Should the goal be to minimize how much time people spend on the screen? What is the value of screen time, and what are people doing that's lasting and fulfilling? And when are you steering people as a designer towards choices that are more shallow or empty?
So you're clearly concerned about time, as we all should be. It's the one non-renewable resource. It's the one thing we can't possibly get back any of, no matter what other resources we marshal. And it's clear that our technology, especially smartphone-based technology, is just a kind of bottomless sink of time and attention. I guess there's the other element that we're going to want to talk about, which is the consequence of bad information or superficial information and just what it's doing to our minds. I mean, the fake news phenomenon being of topical interest, but just the quality of what we're paying attention to is crucial. But the automaticity of this process, the addictiveness of this process, the fact that we're being hooked and we're not aware of how calculated this intrusion into our lives is.
This is the thing that's missing, is that people don't realize, because there's the most common narrative, I mean, we hear this all the time, that technology is neutral and it's just up to us to choose how we want to use it. And if people do fake news, or if people start wasting all their time, that's just people's responsibility. What this misses is that because of the attention economy, which is every basically business, whether it's a meditation app or the New York Times or Facebook or Netflix or YouTube, you're all competing for attention. The way you win is by getting someone's attention and by getting it again tomorrow and by extending it for as long as possible. So it becomes this arms race for getting attention. And the best way to get attention is to know how people's minds work so that you can basically push some buttons and get them to not just come, but then to stay as long as possible. So there are design techniques like making a product more like a slot machine that has a variable schedule reward. So, for example, I know you use Twitter. When you land on Twitter, notice that there's that extra variable time delay between like 1 and 3 seconds before that little number shows up. You hit return and the page loads. There's this extra delay.
I haven't noticed that.
Yeah, hold your breath. And then there's a little number that shows up for the notifications. And that delay makes it like a slot machine. You're literally, when you load the page, you're as if you're pulling a lever and you're waiting, and you don't know how many there's going to be. Is there going to be 500 because some big tweet storm, or is there going to be
Doesn't it always say 99?
Well, not everyone is Sam Harrison has so many.
No, but I mean, isn't that always the maximum? It never says 500, right?
So I don't, because again, I'm not you. I don't have as many followers.
No, I think I can attest that. I mean, mine is always at 99, so it's no longer salient to me.
Well, right, which actually speaks to how addictive variable rewards work, which is the point, is it has to be a variable reward. So the idea that I push a lever or pull a lever, and sometimes I get, 2, and sometimes I get nothing, and sometimes I get, 20. And this is the same thing with email.
Well, let's talk about what is the interest of the company, because I think most people are only dimly aware. I mean, they're certainly aware that these companies make money off of ads. Very often they sell your data. So your attention is their resource.
Yep.
But take an example. I mean, so something like Twitter seemingly can't figure out how to make money yet, but Facebook doesn't have that problem. Let's take the clearest case. What is Facebook's interest in you as a user?
Well, obviously there's many sources of revenue, but it all comes down to whether it's data or everything else, it comes down to advertising and time. Because of the link that more of your attention or more of your time equals more money, they have an infinite appetite in getting more of your time.
So time on your newsfeed,
and this is literally how
what they
metrics,
want. Yeah.
That's right. And this is literally how the metrics and the dashboards look. I mean, they measure what is the current sort of distribution of time on site. Time on site is that and 7-day actives are the currency of the tech industry. And so the only other industry that measures users that way is sort of drug dealers, right? Where you have the number of active users who log in every single day. So that combined with time on site are the key principal metrics. And the whole goal is to maximize time on site. So Netflix wants to maximize how much time you spend there. YouTube wants to maximize time on site. They recently celebrated people watching more than 1 billion hours a month. And that was a goal. And not because there's anyone who's evil or who wants to steal people's time, but because of the business model of advertising. There is simply no limit on how much attention that they would like from people.
Well, they must be concerned about the rate at which you click through to their ads, or are they not?
They can be concerned about that, but because, and ad rates are depreciating, but because they can make money just by simply showing you the thing, and there is some link between showing it to you and you clicking, you can imagine with more and more targeted things that you are seeing things that are profitable. And there's always going to be someone willing to pay for that space. But this problem means that as this starts to saturate, because we only have so much time, to even hold on to your position in the attention economy, what do? You have to ratchet up how persuasive you are. So here's a concrete example. If you're YouTube, you need to add autoplay the next video.
Right.
to YouTube.
Yeah.
Didn't used to do that within the last
I
year.
always find that incredibly annoying.
Yep.
I wonder what percentage of people find that annoying. I mean, is it conceivable that that is still a good business decision for them, even if 99% of people hate that feature?
Well, it's with the whole exit voice or loyalty. If people don't find it so annoying that they're going to stop using YouTube, because the defense, of course, is
Yeah, there's no way they're going to stop using YouTube.
of
So,
course not. And
yeah.
that's what these companies often hide behind, this notion that if you don't like it, you can stop using the product. But while they're saying that, I mean, they have teams of thousands of engineers whose job is to deploy these techniques I learned at the Persuasive Technology Lab to get you to spend as much time as possible. But just with that one example, let's say YouTube adds autoplay the next video. So they just add that feature. And let's say that increases your average watch time on the site every day by 5%. So now they're eating up 5% more of this limited attention market share.
Mm.
So now Facebook's sitting there saying, well, shoot, we can't let this go, to dry. So we've got to actually add autoplay videos to our newsfeed. So instead of waiting for you to scroll and then click play on the video, they automatically play the video. They didn't
Yeah.
always used to do that.
Yes, another feature I hate.
Yep. And the reason, though, that they're doing that, what people miss about this is it's not by accident. The web and all of these tools will continue to evolve to be more engaging and to take more time, because that is the business model. And so you end up in this arms race for essentially who's a better magician, who's a better persuader, who knows these back doors in people's minds as a way of getting people to spend more time.
Now, do you see this as intrinsically linked to the advertising model of revenue, or would this also be a problem if it was a subscription model?
It's a problem in both cases, but advertising exacerbates the problem. So you're actually right that, for example, Netflix also maximizes time on site. What I heard from someone through some back channels was that the reason they have to do this is they found that if they don't maximize, because, for example, they have this auto countdown watching the next episode,
Right.
So they
Yeah.
don't have to do that. Why are they
Yeah.
doing that?
Strangely, I like that feature.
Yeah.
Try to figure that out, psychologists among you.
Well, and this is where it gets down to what is ethical persuasion, because that's a one persuasive transaction where they are persuading you to watch the next video.
Yeah.
But in that case, you're happy about it.
I guess the reason why I'm happy about it there is that it is, at least 9 times out of 10, it is by definition something I want to watch because it's in the same series as the series I'm already watching, right? Whereas YouTube is showing me just some random thing
Yep.
that they think is analogous to the thing I just watched. And then when you're talking about Facebook, or I guess I've seen this feature on embeds in news stories, like in the Atlantic or Vanity Fair, the moment you bring the video into the frame of the browser, it'll start playing.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that annoying, especially if your goal is to read the text rather than watch the video.
Yep. But again, there's this, because of the game theory of it, when one news website evolves that strategy, you can think of these as kind of organisms that are mutating new persuasive strategies that either work or not at holding on to people's attention. And so you have some neutral playing field, and one guy mutates this strategy on the news website of autoplaying that video when you land. Let's say it's CNN. So now the other news websites, if they want to compete with that, they have to, and assuming that CNN has enough market share that makes it a difference, the other ones have to start trending in that direction. And this is why the internet has moved from being this neutral feeling resource where you're kind of just accessing things to feeling like there's this gravitational wormhole suck kind of quality that pulls you in. And this is what I think is so important. You asked, how much of this is due to advertising and how much of it is due to the hyper competition for attention. It's both. One is we have to be able to decouple the link between how much attention we get from you and how much money we make. And we actually did the same thing with, for example, in energy markets, where it used to be the energy companies made more money the more energy you use.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore they have an incentive. They want you to please leave the lights on, please leave the faucet on. We are happy. We're making so much more money that way. But of course, that was a perverse incentive. And so this new regulatory commission got established that basically decoupled. It was called decoupling. It decoupled the link between how much energy you use and how much money they make.
Well, and there's some ads online that I can't even figure out how they're working or why they're there. There are these horrible ads at the bottom of even the most reputable websites, like the Atlantic. You'll have these ads. I think usually they're framed with, from around the web, and it'll be an ad like, "You won't believe what these child celebrities look like today."
Taboola and Outbrain. There's a whole actual kind of market of companies that specifically provide these related links at the bottom of news websites.
But they're so tawdry and awful. I mean, so you can go from just, reading literally the best long form journalism and hit just one garish ad after another. But the thing that mystifies me is when you click through to these things, I can't see that it ever lands at a product that anyone who was reading that article would conceivably buy. I mean, you're just going down the sinkhole into
Yep.
something horrible. Everything looks like a scam. It's just,
It all comes down to money, though. The reason why, so I actually know a lot about this because the way I arrived at Google was they bought our little startup company for our talent. And we didn't do what this sort of market of websites did, but we were almost being pushed by publishers who used our technology to do that. So one of the reasons I'm so sensitive to this time on site stuff is because I had a little company called Apture, which provided little in-depth background pieces of information without making you leave news websites. So you'd be on the Economist and it would talk about Sam Harris, and you'd say, who's Sam Harris? You'd highlight it and we'd give you sort of a multimedia backgrounder thing, and you could interactively explore and go deeper. And the reason we sold this, the reason why Economist wanted it on their website is because it increased time on site. And so I was left in this dilemma where the thing that I got up to do in the morning as a founder was, let's try to help people understand things and learn about things. But then the actual metric was, is this increasing our time on site or not? And publishers would push us to either increase revenue or increase time on site. And so the reason that The Economist and all these other even reputable websites have these bucket of links at the bottom is because they actually make more money from Taboola and Outbrain and a few others.
now time on site seems somewhat insidious as a standard, except if you imagine that the content is intrinsically good. Now I'm someone who's slowly but surely building a meditation app, right? So now
Right.
time on my app will be time spent practicing meditation. And so insofar as I think that's an intrinsically good thing for someone to be doing,
Yep.
anything I do in the design of the app so as to make that more attractive to do and in the best case, irresistible to do, right? I mean, the truth is I would like an app in my life that got me to do something that is occasionally hard to do, but I know is worth doing and good for me to do,
Right.
rather than waste my time on Twitter. Something like meditation, something like exercise, eating more wisely. I don't know how that can be measured in terms of time, but there are certain kinds of manipulations, speaking personally, of my mind that I would happily sign up for. Right. So how do you think about that?
Absolutely. So this is a great example. So because of the attention economy constantly ratcheting up these persuasive tricks, the price of entry for, say, a new meditation app is you're going to have to try and find a way to sweeten that front door so that competes with the other front doors that are on someone's screen at the moment when they wake up in the morning. And of course, as much as and I think many of us don't like to do this, it's like the Twitter and the Facebook and the email ones are just so compelling first thing in the morning, even if that's not what we'd like to be doing. And so because all of these different apps are neutrally competing on the same playing field for morning attention and not a specific kind of like helping Sam wake up best in the morning, for your meditation app and what many meditation apps I personally know, they have to provide usually these notifications. So they start realizing, oh, shoot, Facebook and Twitter are notifying people first thing in the morning to get their attention. So if we're going to stand a chance to get in the game, we have to start notifying people.
Right.
And then everyone starts, again, amping up in the arms race, and you don't end up with, it's this classic race to the bottom. You don't end up with a screen you want to wake up to in the morning at all. It's not good for anybody. But it all came from this this need to basically get there first, to race up. And so wouldn't we want to change the structure of what you're competing for so it's not just attention at all cost?
So you have called for what I think you've called a Hippocratic oath for software designers. First, do no harm. What do you think designers should be doing differently now?
Well, I think of it less as the Hippocratic oath. That's the thing that got captured in the Atlantic article. But a different way to think about it is that the attention economy is like this city. Essentially Apple and Google and Facebook are the urban planners of this city that 1 billion people live inside of. And we all live inside of it. Like 1 billion people live inside of this attention city. And in that city, it's designed entirely for commerce. It's maximizing basically attention at all costs. And that was fine when we first got started. But now this is a city that people live inside of. I mean, the amount of time people spend on their phone, they wake up with them, they go to sleep with them, they check them 150 times a day.
That's actually a real figure too, right?
150
Yeah.
times a day is a real figure for sure. Yeah. And so now what we'd want to do is organize that city almost like, Jane Jacobs created this sort of livable cities movement and said, there are things that make a great city great. There are things that make a city livable. She pointed out eyes on the street, Stoops in New York. She was talking about Greenwich Village. These are things that make a neighborhood feel different, feel more homey, livable, safe. These are values people have about what makes a good urban planned city. There is no set of values to design this city for attention. So far, it's been this Wild West, let each app compete on the same playing field to get attention at all costs. So when you ask me, what should app designers do? I'm saying it's actually a deeper thing. That's like saying, what should the casinos who are all building stuff in the city do differently?
Right.
If a casino's there and the only way for it to even be there is to do all the same manipulative stuff that the other casinos are doing, it's going to go out of business if it doesn't do that. So the better question to ask is, how would we reorganize the city by talking to the urban planners, by talking to Apple, Google, and Facebook to change the basic design? So let's say there are zones. And one of the zones in the attention economy city would be the morning habits zone. So now you just get things competing for what's the best way to help people wake up in the morning, which could also include the phone being off, right? That could be part of how the option of the phone being off for a period of time and telling your friends that you're not up until 10 in the morning or whatever could be one of the things competing for the morning part of your life in the life zone there. And that would be a better strategy than trying to change, meditation app designers to take a Hippocratic oath to be more responsible when the whole game is just not set up for them to succeed.
Well, to come back to that question, because it's of personal interest to me, because I do want to design this app in a way that seems ethically impeccable.
Mm-hmm.
If the thing you're directing people to is something that you think is intrinsically good, and I mean, forget about all the competition for mind share that exists that you spoke about, it's just hard to do anyway. I mean, people are reluctant to do it. That's why I think an app would be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the existing apps are valuable. So if you think that any time on app is time well spent, which I don't think Facebook can say, and I don't think Twitter can say, but I think Headspace can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that's true, someone else can decide. But I think without any sense of personal hypocrisy, I think they feel that if you're using their app more, that's good for you, right? Because they think that it's intrinsically good to meditate. And I'm sure any exercise app, or the health app or whatever it is, I'm sure that they all feel the same way about that. And they're probably right. Take that case and then let's move on to a case where everyone's motives are more mercenary and where time on the app means more money for the company, which isn't necessarily the case for some other apps. When time on the app is intrinsically good, why not try to get people's attention any way you can?
Right. Well, so this is where the question of metrics is really important because in an ideal world, the thing that each app would be measuring would align with the thing that each person using the app actually wants. So time well spent would mean, in the case of meditation app, asking the user, just not saying the app would do this, but if you were to think about it, a user would say, okay, in my life, what would be time well spent for me in the morning, waking up? And then imagine that whatever the answer to that question is should be the rankings in the App Store, rewarding the apps that are best at that. So that, again, is more the systemic answer that the systems like the App Stores and the ranking functions that run, say, search, Google Search, or Facebook Newsfeed would want to sort things by what helps people the most, not what's got the most time.
And the measure of that would be the evaluation of the user. I mean, there's some questionnaire-based rating. Is this working for you?
Yeah, and in fact, we've done some initial work with this. Actually, there's an app called Moment on iOS. So Moment tracks how much time you spend in different apps. You send it a screenshot of your battery page on the iPhone, and it just captures all that data. And they've partnered with Time Well Spent to ask people, which apps do you find are most time well spent? You're most happy about the time you spent when you can finally see this is all the time you spent in it. And which apps do you most regret? And we have the data back that people regret the time that they spend in Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and WeChat the most. And they tend, so far the current rankings are, for the most, are like MyFitnessPal and podcasts, and there's a bunch of other ones that I forgot.
The irony is that being ranked first in regret is probably as accurate a measure as any of the success of your app.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this is why the economy isn't ranking things or aligning things with what we actually want.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it as everything is a choice architecture, and you're sitting there as a human being worth picking from a menu. And currently the menu sorts things by what gets the most downloads, the most sales, gets most talked about, the things that most manipulate your mind. So the whole economy has become this, if you assume marketing is as persuasive as it is on a bigger level, the economy reflects what's best at manipulating people's psychology, not what's actually best in terms of delivered benefits in people's lives. And so if you think about this as a deeper systemic thing about how would you want the economy to work? You'd want it to rank things so that the easiest thing to reach for would be the things that people found to be most time well spent in their lives, for whatever category of life choice that they're making at that moment. In terms of making choices easy or hard, because you can't escape, in every single moment there is a menu, and some choices are easy to make, and some choices are hard to make.
Seems to me you run into a problem which behavioral economists know quite well, and this is something that Dan Kahneman has spoken a lot about, that there's a difference between the experiencing self moment to moment and the remembered self. So when you're giving someone a questionnaire, asking them whether their time on all these apps and websites was well spent, you are talking to the remembered self. And Danny and I once argued about this, how to reconcile these two different testimonies, but at minimum, you can say that they're reliably different, so that if you were experience sampling people along the way, for every 100 minutes on Facebook, every 10 minutes you were saying, how happy are you right now? You would get one measure. If at the end of the day you asked them, how good a use of your time was that to be on Facebook for 100 minutes, you would get a different measure. Sometimes they're the same, but they're very often different. And the question is who to trust. Where are the data that you're going to use to assess whether people are spending their time well?
Well, I mean, the problem right now is that all of the metrics just relate to the current present self version, right? Everything is only measuring what gets most clicked or what gets most shared. So back to fake news, just because something is shared the most doesn't mean it's the most true. Just because something gets clicked the most doesn't mean it's the best. Just because something is talked about the most doesn't mean that it's real or true, right? The second that Facebook took away its human editorial team for the Facebook trends, and they fired that whole team, and so it's just an AI picking what the most popular news stories are. Within 24 hours, it was gamed, and the top story was a false story about Megyn Kelly and Fox News. And so right now, if getting into AI about all of these topics, AIs essentially have a pair of eyes or sensors that are trying to pick from these impulsive or immediate signals. And it doesn't have a way of being in the loop or in conversation with our more reflective selves. It can only talk to our present in the moment selves. And so you can imagine some kind of weird dystopian future where the entire world is only listening to your present in the moment feelings and thoughts, which are easily gameable by persuasion.
Although it just is a question how to reconcile the difference between being pleasantly engaged moment by moment in a activity at the end of which you will say, I kind of regret spending my time that way. There are certain things that are captivating where you're hooked for a reason, right? Whether it's a video game or whether you're eating French fries or popcorn or something that is just perfectly salted so that you just can't stop. You're binging on something because in that moment it feels good, and then retrospectively, very often you regret that use of time.
Well, so one frame of this is this sort of shallow versus deep sense. That's what you're getting at here, is a sense of something can either be full but empty, which we don't have really words in the English language for this, or something can be full and fulfilling.
Things can be very engaging or pleasurable, but not fulfilling.
Yes, and even more specifically, regretted. And then there's the set of choices that you can make for a timeline. If you're, again, scheduling someone else's life for them, as people at Google and Facebook do every day, where you can schedule a choice that is full and fulfilling. Now, does that mean that we should never put choices on the menu that are full but you regret? Like, should we never do that for Google or for Facebook? That's one frame, but let me actually flip it around and make it, I think, even more philosophically interesting. Let's say that in the future, YouTube is even better at knowing exactly what at every bone in your body you've been meaning to watch, like the professor or lecture that you've been told was like the best lecture in the world, or just think about what every bone in your body tells you, in fact, would be full and fulfilling for you. And let's imagine this future DeepMind powered version of YouTube is actually putting those perfect choices next on the menu. So now it's auto-playing the perfect next thing that is also full and fulfilling.
Right.
There's still something about the way the screen is steering your choices that are not about being in alignment with the life you want to live, because it's not in alignment with the time dimension now. So now it's sort of blowing open or blowing past boundaries. You have to bring your own boundaries.
Right. You have to resist the perfect.
You have to resist the perfect.
Yeah.
Now, should that be, and by the way, because of this arms race, that is where we're trending to. People don't understand this. The whole point of attention, the attention economy, because of this need to maximize attention, that's where YouTube will be in the future. And so wouldn't you instead say, I want Netflix's goal to basically optimize for whatever is time well spent for me, which might be, let's say for me, watching one really good movie a week that I've been really meaning to watch. And that's because I'm defining that. It's in conversation with me about what I reflectively would say is time well spent. And it's not trying to just say you should maximize as much as possible. And for that relationship to work, the economy would have to be an economy of loyal relationships, meaning I would have to recognize as a consumer that even though I only watch, one movie a week, that's enough to justify my relationship with Netflix. Because they found in this case that if they don't maximize time on site, people actually end up canceling their subscription over time. And so that's why they're still trapped in the same arms race.
Right. And what concerns you most in this space? Is it social media more than anything else, or is everything that's grabbing attention engaged in the same arms race and kind of equal concern to you?
Well, it's as a systems person, it's really the system, right? It's the attention economy. It's the race for attention itself that concerns me. Because one is people are in the tech industry appear to me very often as being blind to what that race costs us. If one, for example, the fake news stuff, instead of going to fake news, let's call it fake sensationalism. The newsfeed is trying to figure out what people click the most. And if one news site evolves the strategy of outrage is a way better persuasive strategy at getting you to click if it generates outrage.
Right.
And so the newsfeed, without even having any person at the top of it, any captain of the ship, saying, oh, I know what's going to be really good for people is outrage, or that'll get us more attention. It just discovers this as an invisible trait that starts showing up in the AI. So it starts steering people towards news stories that generate outrage. And that's literally where the news feeds have gone in the last
that's where we are.
3 months. This is where we are.
True or fake. It's an outrage machine. Yeah.
And then the question is, how much is that outrage? If you thought about it, in the world, is there any lack of things that would generate outrage? There's an infinite supply of news today. And there was even 10 years ago that would generate outrage.
Right.
And if we had the perfect AI 10 years ago, we could have also delivered you a day full of outrage. And so...
that's a funny title.
A day full of outrage.
Yeah, how easy would that be to market? A day full of outrage. Nobody thinks they want that, but we're all acting like that's exactly what we want.
Well, and I think this is where the language gets interesting, because when we talk about what we want, we talk about what we click. But in the moment, right before you click, I'm kind of a meditator too. It's like I notice that what's going on for me right before I click is not, as you know from free will, how much is that a conscious choice? What's really going on phenomenologically in that moment right before the click?
None of your conscious choices are conscious choices.
Right.
You're the last to know why you're doing the thing you're about to do, and you're very often misinformed about it. We can set up experiments where you'll reliably do the thing for reasons that you, when you're forced to articulate them, are completely wrong about.
Absolutely. And even moreover, people, again, when they're about to click on something, don't realize there's 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it was to get you to click on that, because that's what Facebook and Snapchat and YouTube are all for. So it's not even a neutral moment.
Do you think that fact alone would change people's behavior if you could make that transparent? It just seems it would be instructive for most people to see the full stream of causes that engineered that moment for them.
Well, one thing, I've got some friends in San Francisco who are talking about this, that people don't realize, and especially when you start applying some kind of normativity and saying, the newsfeed's really not good, we need to rank it a different way. And they say, whoa, 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 who are you to say what's good for people? And I always say this is status quo bias. People are thinking that somehow the current thing we have is set up to be best for people. It's not.
Yes.
It's best for engagement. If you were to give it a name, if Google has PageRank, Facebook is engagement rank. Now let's take it all the way to the end. Let's say you could switch modes as a user, and you could actually switch Facebook to addiction rank. The Facebook actually has a version of newsfeed that I'm sure it could deploy called, let's just actually tweak the variables so that let's show people the things that will addict them the most. Or we have outrage rank, which will show you the things that will outrage you the most.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have NPR rank, which actually shows you the most boring, long comment threads where you have like these, long, in-depth conversations that your whole newsfeed is these long, deep, threaded conversations. Or you could have the Bill O'Reilly mode where you get these, as something I know you care about, these sort of attack dog style comment threads where people are yelling at each other. You can imagine that the newsfeed could be ranked in any one of these ways.
Actually, this form of choice is already implemented on Flickr, where when you look for images, you can choose relevant or interesting, or so you could have that same drop-down menu for any of these other media.
And this is your point of like people don't see transparently what the goals of the designers who put that choice in front of you are.
Right.
So the first thing would be to reveal that there is a goal. It's not a neutral product. It's not just something for you to use. You can obviously, with enough effort, use Facebook for all sorts of things. But the point is the default sort of compass or North Star on the GPS that is Facebook of steering your life is not steering your life towards, hey, help me have the dinner party, that I want to have, or help me get together with my friends on Tuesday, or help me make sure I'm not feeling lonely on a Tuesday night.
There is, it seems to me, a necessary kind of paternalism here that we just have to accept, because it seems true that we're living in a world where no one or virtually no one would consciously choose the outrage tab.
Right.
Like basically, I want to be as outraged as possible today. Show me everything in my news feed that's going to piss me off.
Nor the addiction tab.
Yeah. Nor the superficial uses of attention tab. Just
cat videos.
Yeah.
All day
Where it's
long.
just give me the Kardashians all day long, and I'll regret it later. So no one would choose that, and yet we are effectively choosing that by virtue of what proves to be clickable in the attention economy.
In service of the greater goal of advertising. Again,
Right.
That goal wasn't by accident. In fact, in some ways it was, because I think sometimes what's so interesting when you talk to the people who make the products, of course, there's no one there who says, I want to take you or steer you away from the life choices that you want to make. No one thinks that way. The narrative, of course, at Facebook is that we're helping make the world more open and connected. And of course, it's hard to argue with that because it does do that too. The problem is that's not what the thing that they're measuring every day is.
Right.
And also, what would that mean? What would be the values or the measurable outcomes or the teleological frames that you'd be choosing for? I mean, instead, imagine a time well spent rank, which would be basically a life rank. Like, what do you want most in your life? And instead of having those 1,000 engineers working to get me to scroll or click on the next thing, those 1,000 engineers would be basically working to help me schedule the next moments of my time in ways that I would find take me closer to the life that I want to live.
You keep using this phrase, time well spent. That is both a website and a foundation you started, or?
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit movement that when I left Google and my work as the design ethicist there, I realized that there was this fundamental conflict of interest, that the attention economy's maximization of time spent was just never going to go away. And so if you want to change that core currency of success, you have to go outside. It's kind of like what the organic food movement was, right? Where before organic food, it was just a race to the bottom to provide the cheapest lettuce on the shelf, and it's whoever can put the cheapest lettuce. And then someone figures out we can put cheap lettuce on there. We can get even cheaper lettuce by using this pesticide. And no one's discovered the pesticide yet, so that farmer starts to win. And it isn't until we have this new standard or this sort of movement that says we want organic food. We want a different kind of lettuce.
Yeah.
So you need that or something like that, some kind of intervention like that to gradually change the success metrics. And so we call that time well spent just because it encapsulates the distinction between time spent today.
So to use that analogy, the differentiator there is a person's willingness to pay for something that's harder to grow, harder to provide, So they're willing to pay more than what you have to pay for the cheapest possible lettuce.
Right.
What differentiates time stolen or squandered from time well spent in the marketplace? Just imagine 5 years from now, we have solved all of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
Our technology is as good for us as possible.
Yeah, good question.
How did we get there? What have we changed?
So what it would take is, there's different questions about how you'd get there, whether it's regulation or it's enlightened founders of big technology companies choosing to rank suddenly everything differently. But you could imagine a world where Apple and Google recognize that the current designs invisibly of the smartphones are to maximize, let's say, the time people spend on all the apps. And that instead of maximizing for that, and instead of just wanting every app developer to be successful at all costs, they say we are going to reorganize home screens and notifications and app stores to rank success in terms of how time well spent people found these things to be for that part of their life. So news media is ranked on the, whatever you would call it, the epistemological credibility or the truth-seeking, or, I mean, again, there's a bunch of different values that would be in that category. Morning habits and meditation apps would be ranked by whatever people find helps them wake up best in the morning. Things would be ranked by the thing that matters for that category.
Although it seems to me you're asking a lot of people to keep telling you whether things are working for them. Because with a click, they've told you without taking any time to tell you. They're not aware of having answered a questionnaire, but the way they're using their attention is giving everyone the information of, whether this stuff is hookable in the way that the status quo now demands. In your world, we need people to assess the effects of their uses of attention and report back. But what are you actually picturing? How do people give the information back to the system so that these rankings reflect time well spent?
So here's a concrete example. So let's imagine in the future, and I totally hear this concern, by the way, that do you want a world where everything is constantly asking you for a rating every single day for all of these things? And the answer is no, obviously. The question would be, from a time well spent angle, that time is the finite resource to manage. What amount of ratings would we want from people? But let's make it concrete. So let's say your phone, once a week basically shows you this reflection of the biggest sort of surface areas of your phone's footprint in your life. So let's say that it shows you this mirror of saying, hey, Sam, this is how I see you waking up in the morning. Here's what a morning for you looks like. I have the data. It's right here on the phone. Yeah. It's stored locally, not in the server. And it says, hey, look, I noticed that you wake up, you usually spend about 20 minutes surfing Twitter. You're in your email for about 15 minutes. And then you get stuck in the Apple News app for about 30 minutes. And so you've got about an hour and 15 minutes before you're kind of doing the
And we notice you haven't moved from your supine position yet.
Let's even call it the sort of like bed zone part of the reflection. You haven't even gotten up. Which, by the way, again, back to persuasion, if you could persuade someone just to lie down while they're doing all this stuff, you've actually are inherently changed the choice architecture. They're more likely to stay in the inertia of lying down than if you had stood them up. Like, just we know from designing physical space. Okay, so we have this moment where we see, in your reflection that you've got this hour and 15 minutes that approximately is split between these different apps. And the phone says, is that what's time well spent for you in the morning? Like, what would be time well spent for you? And you would say, actually, not these things at all. And say, great, what would it look like instead? And you'd say, hey, I want to meditate with my friends two days a week. And it says, great, who else meditates? And it would be directly linked into your app. And it'd basically say, when you and this other person wake up in the morning around the same time, do you want to opt into some kind of mode? So when you wake up, it shows you that if they also woke up around that time, and you could swipe over and, you're in a meditation experience with them. And so now your meditation app wins on the basis of how well it actually helps people in that morning, not how well it can just hijack and throw a notification in or create the bottomless bowl or do these other kind of persuasive techniques.
Right.
And so that's an example where the phone is asking you for reflection at an infrequent enough basis that it doesn't feel taxing. Let's say it's once a month even. And then it reorganizes the choice architecture of the home screen to be most aligned with empowering you to make those choices.
But again, now you're talking at the level of the city. This is not what any one app does. This
Correct.
is what Apple does.
This is what Apple and Google. And this is why, frankly, you need Apple and Google to make these changes, or anyone who makes the platform, whether it's virtual reality or augmented reality or an earpiece, there in general, there's going to be these choice architectures that we need those platform makers, the urban planners, to be thinking about it this way.
Yeah, I want to talk about virtual reality and other technology, but to get my bearings here, do you think mostly in terms of mobile, or is the web just as much?
I'm concerned with both because just the total time people spend on a screen every day is enormous, and it obviously takes place increasingly on mobile. The thing about mobile is it's just the most ubiquitous. So it's the thing that affects everyone, no matter what sort of socioeconomic background you have.
Do you know how the time is split between mobile and the web?
I don't off the top of my head, but
Huh.
obviously there's people, knowledge workers who spend a third of their day in email at a desktop, and there's this wide range. The question is just, for each one of these core screens, how well is the choice architecture aligned with what people want?
So now, what do you think is coming? What do you think virtual reality will do to us? And do we get new concerns there, or just the same concerns but more pressing? How?
Well, one interesting thing about virtual reality is if you were to rate a medium in terms of how persuasive it is. So there's sort of a upper bound on how persuasive your mobile phone is,
Mm,
right? It can't convince you of a new belief system, right? But actually, virtual reality can. It's been shown that in looking at this whole problem through a lens of persuasive technology, you're always concerned with what are the dimensions of persuasion? Can I just persuade people's beliefs? Can I persuade people's attitudes? Can I persuade people's identity to think of themselves differently? And one thing that's been shown, this guy Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford has done a bunch of experiments on this, that you can have someone in virtual reality cut down a tree and to feel like the haptic feedback of this thing jogging in your hands back and forth.
hmm
And that actually changes your relationship to paper, like to basically wasting paper. You can do some other things where people are embodied as like their opposite gender, and they experience something like not sexual assault, but some kind of, or an opposite race or opposite ethnic background, and they experience some kind of embodied feeling or experience of someone looking at them a certain way in that mode, and it changes their feelings about what those policy issues might be later
Mm.
in the world. And so VR is really interesting because it's the most persuasive medium that we have. And the problem, though, is that people tend to think about the future of technology as this being kind of an uncertain thing, that we don't know what's going to happen. It's like a grassy field, and it's not that, because the attention economy will still create this race for who's better at seducing your attention and keeping your attention and holding on to it, which means that things that are more like porn or more like the Candy Crushes of the VR realm will probably outcompete other things in that
Mhm.
realm. And the other stuff will exist, but it'll be niche. And so what I would say is, like, this is the opportunity now before those things come to say, if we had a different philosophical lens on what rankings we would want the virtual reality app store to have, we'd want to rank things in terms of what persuades people in a positive way, or what is time well spent for them.
It's interesting because on some level, what we're talking about isn't new at all. I mean, people were wasting time 2,000 years ago, presumably. When you look at how the people like the Buddha talked about the use of a human life and the obstacles, in this case, to practicing meditation enough so as to have a good experience doing it, or to, the obstacles to becoming a truly ethical person. It was the same dynamic of doing things that you will later regret, doing things that you will discover were not as gratifying as they seemed, and they were never going to be as gratifying as they seemed. And if you could have had a wiser view, a top level view of the situation, you would have agreed to cancel some of those opportunities to squander your time in advance,
Right.
because however captivating they are, it is just more soft drinks or candy or porn.
But then I
or
push back and say, so
Yeah.
Sam, you're running Google. Who are you to say that what the things we should put on the menu are and what stuff we should leave out? Because we
Well,
have to put some default choices on the menu for
right,
people.
right. Yeah, so it's this ancient problem, except what we have now are technologies that can not only exploit our bugs to the, if not the maximal degree, to certainly to a new degree where we can be manipulated by others to waste our time, but we can actually design technologies that will change not only what we wind up doing, but what we want to do.
Yep.
The fundamental question is, like, what sort of person do you want to be, and
Yep.
what sort of life do you want to live, and what sort of life will you want to have lived? When you're on your deathbed looking back, how much regret will you have? we know the answer to this question. How much regret do you want to have? Everyone's answer is none, right? Or as little as possible.
And they won't change the fact that they'll go for the donut or, go for the exhilarating experience. Cass Sunstein has a great line about this that, just because there are these things people regret later doesn't mean life should be, in his words, long, dry, and chocolate free.
Right.
That there is a value. Some of our peak experiences in life are these sort of impulsive moments, but there is a question of boundedness or frequency. Like, do you want that all the time? Do you want the default choices to always be set that way?
You really get this raising kids because you're constantly in the position as a parent of doling out empty pleasures or even unhealthy pleasures to your kids, as sparingly as is commensurate with your philosophy on these things. So whatever it is, ice cream. Do you have ice cream every day? No, right? But ice cream is a treat and it's fun, and you don't want to live a life without ice cream, as far as I can tell. So you're, in a conservative way, exploiting your child's really bottomless capacity for joy around certain things which shouldn't, in the end, be the focus of life. You don't want a kid that, when he or she becomes an adult, has no way to console herself or himself but to go for a tub of ice cream. You don't want to figure out how to engineer that problem for them, but you still want a life with ice cream. And everything is like that on some level.
And the problem is the new ice cream could be just the number of likes that someone has. I mean, I can convince, as so many teenagers are, they've been convinced that their self-worth or their popularity is the number of likes that they have.
Yeah, or Minecraft. I mean, I have an 8-year-old daughter who's now obsessed with Minecraft, and I can't even figure out whether Minecraft is good, neutral, or bad for her. People with strong opinions on that, tell me what you think about Minecraft. It's captivating to a degree that worries me, right? It's like, if I said, listen, you know what, you can just do as much Minecraft as you want, she would just disappear into virtual space and never come out again.
Does she use Snapchat?
No, nothing like that yet. Yeah. We will be late adopters of all of that. But yeah, I can see that, the social aspect to this, and I mean, the social media, it seems to me, brings at least two levels of concern that don't exist in these areas where we're just squandering our time. I mean, the worst case scenario is for an individual siloed app or a website, you're just misusing your time and you'll regret it. But with social media, this again connects to the fake news problem. You are very likely consuming misinformation that is manipulating you, and this is bad not only for you, but for society. And then you have this other level of your sense of self-worth being leveraged and in many cases destroyed, and at an early age in ways that can be difficult to recover from by your interaction with friends and strangers in this space.
Well, and this is where it relates to cults, right? Because cults partially manipulate you by orchestrating your sense in the social realm as well, right? Just like we were talking about Facebook ranking before, you could imagine a jealousy rank, which is a ranking of newsfeed or Instagram that is optimized to make you the most jealous of everybody else, or to feel the worst about yourself. Like that's just a mode you could create. And I've written about this, but we have not just this list of individual cognitive biases, but we also have these social psychological biases. We really care about others' approval. So think of the moment where people post a new profile photo on Facebook. That's a moment where you're putting your whole sort of self-identity on the line. It's like my new photo. And so knowing this, I don't know if Facebook does this, but knowing this, oh my God, I would just say, this is an easiest opportunity to exploit people's sense of self-worth. So what I'm going to do is time delay how often I notify you of new likes. So over the period of 3 days, I'll keep showing it to other friends strategically over the course of 3 days, because then they'll start to like it more. And then I, caring about who's liked my new thing, will fall back into the loop, right? So that would be one way of hijacking people's attention again, by controlling their sense of identity. And Snaps, I don't know how much you follow Snapchat, but they have this feature called Snap Streaks, which is, I think, really manipulative. Do you know Snap Streaks?
No, I never use Snapchat. So,
I mean, I don't either, but they added this thing called Snap Streaks, which shows you the number of days in a row that you have sent a message with someone. And so, people who use it actively, it's like in the meditation app, you'd have the same.
Right, but I see the implications here where if you, there's a reciprocity issue when you're communicating with someone.
And
Yeah.
the thing is that as Snapchat, you can manufacture reciprocity. You can know that that person over there is vulnerable to needing to reciprocate.
Mm.
Like, let's say you have a person that you know their psychology specifically, they have to say thank you back when someone says thank you to them. So you can just make sure that they see thank yous everywhere. Or Facebook, frankly, does this with the happy birthday thing.
Right.
They can sort of orchestrate someone into saying happy birthday to someone else. So the other person has to come back into Facebook and respond. And this is actually how LinkedIn works, where they say, we're going to suggest to Sam that right after our conversation that he adds Tristan on LinkedIn, because I'll know that I'll feel compelled to come back to you. And again, this is like a cult. It's like you don't just control these individual biases. You can orchestrate people's whole social psychological biases without them knowing it.
So we've spoken a little bit about what designers of the city should do, whether they will do any of these things, and over what time frame. That's certainly an open question. What should our listeners do in light of the fact that nothing will get done today to help them marshal their attention in a way that they will not regret?
Well, I mean, I try not to get into the productivity hacks game. I mean, I do know a lot about that space. I think the biggest thing is to change culturally the perception that technology is neutral. When we're using this stuff, we have to recognize that there's 1,000 engineers on the other side of the screen whose goal in designing the way I'm looking at this screen now was not to empower me most to make the life choices of my time that I want to make, but empowering me to spend time on the screen. Knowing that you will be able to spot some of these different techniques more easily because you can start to become aware of, what actually am I being steered to do in any given moment. Now, that's actually not a pleasant way to live. And that's why I think we actually need a new conversation about persuasion, because we don't want to sit there in a world that's increasingly going to get better and better at persuading us and then be forced to sort of notice all these steering mechanisms in our lives and feel taxed and vigilant all the time. An ideal would be to be able to only deploy conscious energy when for the choices that matter, and to not be forced to kind of steer away from the donuts. You can imagine an adversarial persuader who puts donuts in your right next to your bedside table right when you wake up. And that would, you could say, well, what's the big deal there? Because you could simply choose to avoid not to choose it. But of course, we just know that would be disempowering, and we have to expend some amount of conscious energy. This is the Roy Baumeister stuff on willpower. There's some amount of energy that it takes to resist this stuff when it shows up.
Yeah.
And we don't want a world where, as we're navigating to Facebook or something else, we have to constantly say, okay, shit, they're going to, try to get me to do something else than this one task I wanted to do of looking up a contact or finding out where that event is tonight. And so the whole idea behind like a sort of a time well spent world is that things are designed so that they're aligned with you. I mean, the biggest thing about ethical persuasion is that the goals of the persuader are aligned with the goals of the persuadee.
Persuasion is, in most cases, neutral. I mean, we want to be persuaded to do things which we will feel constituted time well spent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there are 10 things on the menu which I really want to get done, want to immerse myself in, there's no possibility that I will regret doing any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them are readily captivating, which is to say that there's basically no friction in me that's impeding my paying attention to those things. But the other 8 are on some level a matter of my eating my vegetables as opposed to the ice cream. I want to be persuaded to do those things. Right. So we're not trying to get rid of persuasion. We want some wisdom in the system.
Yep.
We want to be able to tell the system what it should be persuading us to do.
Right. I mean, let's imagine if we're playing the AI game here and we're trying to just imagine that we're training the AI to be hyper intelligent persuaders. Let's imagine you even give the AI an encyclopedia of every magician cult technique that in the book. So it's literally, we have an AI that can persuade you to do anything. Thought experiment. That sounds, we then really care about, what does it mean for that AI to persuade you ethically or for the good?
Right.
And to do that, it could say, well, look, it's persuading you to click on this thing, and you seem to keep clicking on it, so you keep reinforcing it. That must be good. But clearly there was still something missing in that signal, that the clicks weren't enough.
Yeah.
And so it has to be, I mean, in the AI community, they call this the human in the loop computing, where they keep the human in the loop of, say, the automatically self-driving car or something like that. This is essentially a reflective self in the loop kind of persuasion. I care, just like I said with the phone example, it cares about what is time well spent for you in the morning. and it reflects that back to you and says, how is this going? And it only does that for the things that are meaningfully important in your life, that it actually matters to do that reflection.
Mm-hmm.
But part of ethical persuasion, I think, is actually caring and helping the other person reflect on whether they're getting kind of what they came for.
It's interesting, though, that there is a disconnection between what people will say they want and what they actually want that drives through all of this. And so your analogy to self-driving cars reminded me of this fact that if you ask people, if you're driving down the street and you're going to hit a group of school children, or you can drive off a cliff, speaking generically, they think the car should probably drive off a cliff, but nobody wants to be in that car. People will have to get better at choosing from the menu,
Yeah.
even in their most reflective moments.
Well, people have to have values. I mean, per your point earlier about, I think, children, I think that the dangerous thing, and it's happened with consumerism, is where their values, the business's values, became our values.
Which is successful advertising.
That is successful advertising. Yeah. They generated, now you desire or want the thing that they got you to want.
Right.
Now, again, what's so bad about that if on reflection you feel happy about that? That's one thing, but there's still another thing, which is when you realize that someone manipulated you into doing that, into wanting that, and you weren't even aware that that was happening, people sometimes have a different point of view about whether or not they feel good about that. And this is the cult thing, right?
Yeah.
This is, I was manipulated into an experience that then made me more free on the other end. And I feel really good about that. But then on retrospect, I feel like, whoa, they were manipulating me that entire time?
Yeah.
And suddenly people have a different, and in culty programming, showing people how they were manipulated is one of the most powerful ways to help people get out of the programming that they were.
Well, I guess on some level, transparency of intention is crucial there, insofar as the relationship with other people is important. So if someone's trying to get you to do something and you understand their motives, right? That you understand, one, that they're actually trying to get you to do something, and two, you know why, and your why is actually their why, well, then there's no problem, right? Then it's a completely consensual situation. You're not going to feel manipulated, but you could feel pressured. You could feel a lot of things. You could have a very hard-charging performance coach who is trying to get you to change, and it could be uncomfortable, but
they could yell at you. They could know that you're traumatized by this particular form of confrontation, so they use that form of confrontation that might be harsh,
right?
But you're happy about it on the other end.
Yeah, and you understand what you signed up for.
Right.
What gets interesting and seemingly demeaning when there's this mismatch between what you think is going on and what is actually going on in the other person's head. And it does matter if it's personalized. If it's just an algorithm, that in fact is a black box that no one understands, but it's just designed to maximize clicks in the universe, that's one thing. But if you have people who are, twirling their mustaches.
How much have you followed like the Cambridge Analytica type stories about political advertising and automated political advertising?
A little bit, just in the, what's happened in this with the Trump phenomenon.
Yeah, so there's a lot of controversy over whether Cambridge Analytica specifically was so effective as it was claimed to be in the election. But it really doesn't matter. What we're talking about is that there are metaphorically things that are very good at using personalized, persuasive targeting to persuade you about. I mean, the famous example in their deck was, if you're the kind of person who values tradition and authority and kind of old school values, and you're male, it would show you a sunset picture of a grandfather and a boy with a gun saying, this is just like the homeland when we used to go hunting or something like that. And then if it's instead, sort of a libertarian, woman in Kansas or something like that who really values the Second Amendment, they'll put a thing of Obama trying to grab your gun or something like that. And knowing what I would know about your specific psychology, I could persuade you towards a particular attitude or belief. And if you just imagine that exists and it's very effective, and that Facebook 100 million times a second runs this auction, it's got Sam's eyeball, and it's basically saying, who's going to pay me the most to persuade Sam? And it doesn't care whether your intention is nefarious, or you want to help Sam, or you're trying to sell him some shoes. It can't make this distinction. We don't have language in English for these subtle versions, these subtle distinctions in persuasion. What is the difference between manipulate, coerce, seduce, drive, steer? There is no vocabulary. And so this is what I actually think is most important. And I think your work is so related to this is how do we come up with the language of persuasion where when we have an increasingly persuasive world, it's one that we actually want to live in. And the biggest thing is that the goals of the persuader are aligned with the goals of the persuadee.